Hello. In this video, I'm going to be explaining what you can expect in a high difficulty chart, what their terminology is, like what the stuff's terminology is, what their purpose is, and when it's fitting. This is made specifically kind of for people who don't know anything about, like, really high difficulty charts in Adofai. First thing I want to go over is what chart means. Chart is just the Adofai term for making a level for a song. Or, well, that's charting, but a chart is a level for an Adofai for a song. So, for example, this right here, once it loads, this is a chart. Charting is the process of making one of these charts. Now, next thing I want to go over is what these are. So these are what you call pseudos. They stand for, well, they're short for pseudo multipress, which if the name doesn't give it away, then I can still explain. Right here, in a kind of good spot for this. Yeah. So right here, it's like in a standard, like one key rhythm. But then here, you have to press 3 keys at once. There are multiple different ways you can make pseudos, and things that look good and things that don't. So for example, this right here is the equivalent of making this 2 keys. So if you listen, I'll speed it up a little, like 4x, 8x speed. Then here, God, it was not that speed. So as you can see, that's at the same rhythm. And for example, something like this, you'll do something. You'll do kind of like this. So if you listen to this, this will produce the same rhythm. Now, the difference between 2-key pseudos, 3-key pseudos, 4-key pseudos is the amount of tiles that there are. So for example, this right here is a 3-key pseudo. The way you can tell is 1 key right here, then the 2nd key within a short interval, and the 3rd key within another interval. That makes up this pseudo. And then this is just a 2-key pseudo because you can see the original tile and then the pseudo 2nd key press right here. Now this, you'll see even in like lower difficulty charts. Now, the next thing that I want to go over would be roll slop. Actually, no. First, you need to know what rolling is. So, sorry, I forgot to change that screen. So what this is rolling. as you can see here, I'll take a screenshot, stop it. So you can see how this key is pressed, then this key, then this key, then this key, and this key, this key, this key, this key. So this is a method of being able to press keys in a really fast manner. So like, for example, the top player can only index around 1,000 BPM, which looks like this. Now to see that a little bit better, I'll scroll speed a little bit. So that is 1,000 BPM indexing. And that's really fast. It may not look like it, but trust me, it is. And this thing is, you have to be able to get it even too. So now, as for why I showed you rolling, also you can try this website out if you want. If you need to practice any of your rolling, made it. This is the same exact BPM. However, you can see it's a lot more like slower because it's spread out against multiple different keys. So that allows you to go even faster. Example, 4,000 BPM. Now, how that ties into this, what you can see in, for example, I'd say, right like this chart, near the end, you can see this is roll slop. Now, these are also pseudos. However, this is kind of just like, if you were to remove all the rolling, this will just be a one key press, and this will be a normal pseudo, so two key press. So, if you need more of an explanation, you can try looking at other top videos and see that while there's a constant movement with some keys, for example in this case it would be 4, you can see there's an extra key pressed here, and then there'll be 2 extra key presses here. But roll slop is kind of used for high energy sections of a song that you can't really chart otherwise, and the same like high energy way. So as you can see, while this technically is inaccurate charting, like these tiles aren't actually in the song. These don't actually fit into the song at all. It is still considered good charting because it creates a constant movement which then matches the energy of the song at that section. So as you can see, for example this, the kicks are the 2 keys here, while the other thing is the normal 1 key presses. Now, for example, putting this at like the very start of the song is, in my opinion, kind of just a bad thing to do. And for example, this one, Not there. This I would not consider this roll slop. Some people might, however, I would not consider it roll slop. What this brings me to next is perch charting. So, if you slow this down, well, where that's slow, hold on. I think this one was one of them, but there's multiple different reasons why you would be able to do this. While this isn't like a high energy part of the song, the entire section is high energy, but why this specific section is roll slop is to match the kind of like the one note just being extended for a long period of time. So as you can hear, for example, right here, then there's this, which can be, there's a few exceptions on roll slop, and then normal charting, and then back to roll slop. There's a few exceptions where that'll be acceptable. For example, I would say something like this. See? So for example, I would say something kind of like this would be okay. Yes, as you can see, the little, like, the little static kind of thing in the background. Somewhat, like, it's kind of static, like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's a little thing you can hear in the background, and then once it gets to this normal charting, it stops. So for example, that is a good use of switching between roll slop to normal chart, then back to roll slop. Another thing I want to go over is what a gimmick is. A gimmick is something that alters the gameplay. Whether it be a visual gimmick or a mechanical gimmick is what I call it. So for example, this, there's people that would consider this a gimmick and some people that wouldn't consider this a gimmick. I would consider this barely a gimmick. It somewhat alters the gameplay, but if you were to remove the effects, it does not alter the gameplay at all, but it kind of affects the way you think. That's a good way to put it. It affects the way you think. A gimmick is something in a chart to kind of divert your expectation without being like specifically part of the chart. So for example, this freezing right here, I will consider a gimmick, since it diverts your expectation. Really good example of a gimmick though. So for example, right here is a gimmick. If you play the song right around here-ish, you can see how it swaps between like 2 different playing styles, so 2 different speeds. While it doesn't necessarily change the gameplay, it still diverts your expectations in a visual manner, while still keeping the original chart intact. So this is a really good example of a gimmick. And a really good example of a visual gimmick. However, there is mechanical gimmicks though. Now this is a good example of a mechanical gimmick. For example, if I turn off autoplay, go back to that section. So you have to hit a certain amount of key presses in. In a certain amount of time. So that is a good example of a mechanical gimmick. Now coming back to the pseudos, there are multiple different ways a pseudo can take shape. So for example, here you saw a 3-key pseudo, right? Now for here, you can also see a 3-key pseudo. So they can take multiple different variations and multiple different shapes. So if you slow this down, you can see these 2-key pseudos here, then these 3-key pseudos. And that is essentially the same thing as if you were to do this, just in a different style. Like for example, if you see the roll stop here, you can see how a lot of this is like more lower energy, and it's kind of up to a build-up. Then, once the drop comes, then it's the roll stop, so it matches kind of the energy of the song. Even though it's technically incorrectly charted, it's still acceptable, and it's still considered good for high-level charts if it matches like the song's energy at that point. Now, for example, roll slap for everything is not a good idea at all. So for example, this, I could make this roll slap. However, there is a better and more efficient way of doing this without doing it as roll slap. Now this brings me up to the next thing, which is something I call precision charting. Some people also call it hurt charting, but I feel like the name is misleading. So, in precision charting, you'll go to a slower speed, like for example 10. This is a good example. This is like really hard to hear. So let me go to a good example. For example, if you've seen my Aegon chart, I don't know how to pronounce it, but you'll notice this. This is what some people call hurt charting. I would more call it precision charting. You'll go to a slower speed, like 7% maybe. And you can hear how all these line up to something. So let me, for example, turn off the hit sounds, or turn it down rather, so you can hear it a little bit better. So you see how every single thing there lines up to something? That is called, again, there's multiple different terms for it. I choose precision charting. And you might see this in a chart like this. Even though it feels like it shouldn't be there, it is a method of charting. Because, like for example, this just looks really weird for how this sounds. However, it is accurate charting, so you might see that in some other charts as well. The last thing I want to go over, however, are zips. So what zips are is, for example, I would say, so for example, you know how I said this was not roll slop? We're actually coming back to this. This would be considered a zip. So a zip, this also be considered a zip, is just like essentially the same thing as multiplying the speed by like a multiple of 3 or like 8 or something, but it kind of looks like this. So for example, this is one good example of a zip. You slow it down. And then, for example, this is also a good example of a zip. Then, going back to this chart, here's another good example of a zip. And again, like roll slop, the zips can also be like non-existent in the chart. However, they match like that little tiny bits energy kind of. It's like, for example, you can hear right here how kind of like the hat or whatever it's called is a zip. This is another zip. However, this zip is more of an estimated zip. So if you hear the little background there, it's not exactly lining up to this. However, it is relatively close, so this would be accepted. And that'll be all, really, that I would need to explain. Oh, also, there is estimated precision charting. So, for example, this. If you slow this down to like a slower speed, like, I don't know, like 3% or like, let's say like 5%. The sounds do not completely line up, however, they line up close enough. And if I raise the sound volume to like 100, see it's kind of like it's pretty similar. Just the hit sounds themselves. So for example, I'll just like let you compare. So I'll start from here. Then I'll let you compare to the actual song. Then both at once. So that is what is called precision, like estimated precision charting, or another term for it I just made up now. It's close enough precision charting, I guess. While it does not line up perfectly, it lines up close enough to where it still kind of makes the same sound, the same pattern, with both just the music on and just the hit sound on. That would really be all that I have to explain. I guess pseudos, actually, one more thing about pseudos. There are two reasons why you would be able to add a pseudo. One is a more emphasized beat or note or whatever. So, for example, going back to this chart, if you go here, you can see this kind of more. It's not multiple different notes in one, but however, it is a more emphasized note. And that also ties into roll slop, how these are formed and why these would be formed and like why they would be formed where they are. So then there's also, got to mention this as well. If you've seen, where is it? I don't know, like inverse singularity chart. Hello, Charnova, if you're watching this. Right here, this is an alternate to pseudo. However, this is just called a multi-tap. Remember how pseudo was short for pseudo multi-tap? So this is just called a multi-tap. So for example, then there's multiple different ways to depict a multi-tap. However, I feel like this is the best one that there is. Like without adding extra visual effects, and I don't like the bare minimum, is to just color this little bit a different color than the normal track. And then multiple different colors for however many keys it is. So for example, this is a 4-key multi-tap, and that is signified with red. This is only a 2-key multi-tap, and that is signified with just a neon version of the original track color. So there's multiple different ways to depict a pseudo as well. This is hold. So normally, it's like with this hold here, you have to hold down the key, hence the name hold. And yeah. Then another example of like when you will be able to use a multi-tap or pseudo is if there's multiple different notes on one beat, on one tile. So for example, right here, so that is another good use of multi-taps and pseudos. However, for like this is just a more emphasized beat, so it gets a pseudo. Then, for example, another good transition between normal charting and roll slop is, for example, this as well. So you can hear, like in the background maybe. Where it kind of has like a different energy, I would say. So it's charted, like how it is actually in the song. Then another good example is if you're literally not able to keep the rolling aspect of it, and there's literally no other way, then you can do this. I found a more efficient way to do that. Not efficient, but like more, it looks better. So for example, this right here, you cannot make this look good as roll slop without speeding it up or slowing it down. However, if you speed it up, then that also changes the rolling speed, which is very, very, very bad for readability and simply just for gameplay. Again, there's specific edge case scenarios. For example, just like tiny little like zips, kind of. So a good example would be again with this chart. One good example would be kind of like this, I guess. Wait, no, that's not roll slop. Hold on, wait. Sorry. this. Okay. So for example, this is another example of it's acceptable to change the rolling speed. If it's at like the very beginning or end, I would say. And again with the zips, it matches like the note's extended period of so yeah. But that's all I really need to explain. So for example, if you were to watch this chart again, you'll be able to point out all the different like things that I taught you about. So for example, roll slop here. Well, actually no, this is just pseudo. Roll slop usually has to be like 800 BPM or above. So, and also has to be like intended as roll slop. And while it's kind of difficult to tell sometimes, most of the time it is really easy to tell. So for example, whenever it matches the song's energy, and whenever the roll slop, like the actual rolling part, isn't in the song. So for example, the rolling here, if this was at the correct speed, then like if this was at 1000% and 1000 BPM, this, I would consider this not roll slop, simply because you'll be able to still hear these in the song. However, with roll slop, these just are non-existent and are only there to keep the constant movement to match the energy. So yeah, that's one another thing. For example, zips there, roll slop here, bunch of pseudos, 3 keys and 2 key transition. Really fast pseudo section, multi-taps to replace pseudos, so it can actually work a little better. Four key multi-taps. Here is another kind of roll slop to save combination. Actually, no, it's not really a zip. I consider it, well, actually, no, it's because it lasts for like a very short period of time. But it's like combination between roll slop and chip and zip. Yeah, just a bunch of pseudos here. You can hear like little kicks back up there for each of the pseudos. About it, Charminoff is a great artist. I would really recommend you check him out. Check out the songs. Really love that music. This one was made by Charminoff as well. 4 keys, 4 key multi-taps here. Technically 3 key multi-taps combined with pseudo, which make it a 4 key multi-tap, or 4 key presses in one. So like section here. That's another zip. Even though you're able to hear it in the song, it's still considered a zip just because of how it looks. And also zip is kind of like, if it's a short burst of like higher key pressing, like a higher BPM, and it's not like prolonged, that's considered a zip. So for example, that's some charting, or this is charting. Then I got persistent charting there. Hold there. So you hold down your key instead of just press it. There. Some sit-ups there. Multi-taps. So, now, if you're watching video, Adofai chart, really high difficulty Adofai chart, you will be able to spot at least most of these that I explained. The zips can be found in lower level charts, like even like base game charts actually. Like in the base game, there's zips. You'll be able to spot gimmicks. Gimmicks can also be used in lower difficulty charts. Slop here, to match the energy of the song there. It's also near the end of the song too, so transition because there's no other good way to chart it while keeping it low slop. Transition because it's the lower energy part of the song. Again to match the energy of the song. Multi-taps. Bunch of sit-ups. Oh, by the way, if you question if it's possible or not, the highest was beaten by Chipper. I forgot the name of the other person that his name to the chart, I think it was. Again, match the energy of the song as well, so those are 4 keys in the roll slop. This is an A key zero here, or A key multi-tap, and then end. So now, once you look at a new Adofai chart, a new high-level Adofai chart, you'll more than likely be able to spot roll slop. You'll be able to definitely spot sit-outs. There's a possibility you might encounter multi-taps, however, not every single high up there chart has them. Actually, not every single high up there chart has roll slop either. There's some that actually are really high difficulty without roll slop. And another thing roll slop does is it kind of just preserves the difficulty. So if you're aiming for a specific difficulty or you chart something and it just feels weird to chart it like without the roll slop because it's like such low energy without the roll slop, kind of. Then you chart a roll slop to preserve difficulty and preserve like just the energy of the song again. So that would be it for everything that I have to teach you about high level Adofai charts. Hope you guys found this helpful, and